Why does it seem to be that they are still maintaining that position of supporting Israel?
Yeah, so in my view, most of those Arab regimes, it's not that they were actively plotting to create a Jewish state, but more so viewed it as an inevitable outcome that they can't do anything about. And against which it was not advisable for them to really, try to stop, because ultimately they had very close ties with the British Empire, and they believed that working with the British Empire was going to allow them to create their new states, right? And Saudi Arabia has been aligned with British Empire and then now with American imperialism throughout its history, and therefore continues to serve those interests primarily in the region at the expense of their own people and then the people within the region as a whole, and certainly the Palestinians. So Saudi Arabia, everybody knows that they have contact with the Israeli state, that they do business with the Israeli state, all on the hush-hush, and so on. That's why normalization with Saudi Arabia was not a far-fetched move by the Americans. But Saudi Arabia is still unable to they're not like the UAE, they can't just say, we're going to normalize without a Palestinian state, quote unquote, and they could survive that. No, there would be immense pushback and pressure from their own people that would make it very difficult for the regime to withstand such critique and such anger from their own people. Now, do the Saudis believe that when they say that they're talking about a Palestinian state that would be properly sovereign, that would respect the Palestinian right of return, all of that? No, I don't think so. They say that publicly, but I think they would be okay with any version of a state sold to then say, okay, it's over, and then normalize with Israel and end it essentially there. But the Israelis aren't even giving them that. This is kind of a funny moment. Israel, they could get, before even the genocide, but even now, this could happen. If they said, you know what, 22% of Palestine, we're not going to take it. We're going to keep all our settlements there. Those settlements will be governed by Israeli law. We're still going to have the ultimate authority over the whole region, over the whole land. Palestinian statehood will not mean that they can have a military or anything like that, and even if they do, it'll be under their thumbs. If they said all of that, they would get Saudi normalization right away, and effectively really put a huge blow into the Palestinian struggle, really. But they won't even do that. They're like, no, why would we even settle for that? We can take it all. And then get Saudi normalization after. That's what they think. And, given the degree of complicity of the Saudi regime, they might not be completely wrong in their calculation. It'll be up to the people to prove them wrong. But Saudi complicity and other Arab regimes have been complicit in the subjugation of the Palestinian people for a long time. Some of the international discourse, even, sometimes people will critique, South African discourse on this or that issue, for example, like maybe they're not talking about the right of return enough or something like that. And while that is true, the critique should be directed against the Arab regimes, who are actually downplaying. They're the ones removing, including the Palestinian Authority, they're the ones removing these talking points out of the international discourse. Who gave up on the right of return but the Palestinian Authority? So the level of Saudi complicity is substantial. Now, there are some things that are happening today that make me just say, I want to wait and see. So for instance, you do see the Saudis, doing some things that upset the Americans. Maybe not greatly upset the Americans. Maybe they don't decouple from the Americans, but they still do things that upset the Americans. For example, giving China that diplomatic win of the Saudi-Iran sort of truce and re-establishment of normalization and that thing, and that China created that. No, that's not something that the Americans were happy with. So you could say that there are some moves that the Saudis are making that are showing some signs that they would no longer just be a vassal of U.S. imperialism, but it's not enough of what we're seeing right now. So the Arab regimes have played a role, certainly, in the subjugation of the Palestinian cause, absolutely.
And do the people of Saudi Arabia support wholeheartedly the position of the government of Saudi Arabia?
It's going to depend on where you are. I've never been to Saudi Arabia. I've not looked at this from an academic, scholarly point, but I've asked scholars that do engage in Saudi Arabia, people who have lived there, Palestinians who have lived there, what is the status of that? Most of them still maintain that the people would not take kindly to a normalization deal that didn't have Palestinian statehood in it. I'm sure there are also elements within Saudi society that may not be able to voice their views, but would also support the right of return and so on. So in general, I would say the UAE, excluded, I'd say the majority of the Arab people are still standing strong in their sentimental support for the Palestinian cause, but much more action is needed. Much more action.
I think the Emiratis, the Emirati people themselves, are also with Palestinians just can't voice,
Right.
because it is not a crowd regime.
Absolutely, yes. And the Saudis, no matter how dictatorial a regime is or authoritarian a regime is, it still cares about public opinion, believe it or not. You might hear things. So that means that the state puts a lot of money and a lot of resources into making it appear as if their discourse is also shared by people. So you might hear a famous imam or something like that in Saudi Arabia, regurgitating the lines of the regime. But don't think of that as like somehow separate from the regime. Usually these positions that are regurgitating these talking points are, well enmeshed with the regime, and not really just like, I've looked at this myself and this is the conclusion I came with. It's not like that, right? So there's a lot of that will happen in the Arab world, and of course the Israelis and the Americans are always pouncing on that. These are the types of voices that when Trump, goes on one of his rants and he'll say, oh, there's a lot of support in the region for my plan, the plan to take over Gaza. But people are just too afraid to talk about it. Usually, he's being talking to some of those types, right? But those are not representatives of the widespread sentiments of people. And I'm sure where he's mostly hearing those things from is the UAE, which has now basically come out and said we're on their side. But we think the Trump plan needs to be considered. Sorry, there was a question there, and then here, and then back.
So earlier in the presentation, you said that there was this perspective that, well, nobody like the Jews from Russia or Eastern Europe coming into Europe or Western Europe, as was known at that time. From your perspective, why was that the reason? Because, it wasn't like Western Europe did not have Jews existing in positions of power too.
Racism, again, anti-Semitism. They were just like, they're poor, because the majority of them they're poor and they're Jewish. So they don't forget, the British had, that's the home of racialized thinking, not Germany. The Germans were in it too, but the British were leaders in that, the French were leaders in that too. So they were like, oh, this inferior Semitic race, blah, 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 all that nonsense.
What is the threshold?
Look, there's no racial or ethnic identity that is not constructed. It's not like there's the earth, the moon, and the Semites. There's no such thing. These things get historically constructed. So its origins lie in linguistic analysis of languages that eventually then morph into this racist idea that this is a race of Semites that has invaded the Aryan racial purified pool and is now diluting it. This is nonsense. There's no historical basis or evidence for any of this. We're also intermixed. There's no. But sorry, to finish that question. But yeah, so the real core of it is anti-Semitism. Really, they had this view of these groups of people as unwanted, inferior race of people that was going to be a burden on their economy and dilute, their Aryan life, right? Like that's what it was, really. And some of the prominent British Jews or French Jews also didn't want them because they were like, these guys might mess up our situation here. We already are on shaky grounds. If they come in here and anti-Semitism grows, we might be in trouble. Some of them thought those ways too.
So when Theodore Herzl, with his coverage of the Dreyfus affair, came out and said, here is the beginnings of Zion, it was with that intention, not with the intention of looking at just the Eastern Europe, Jews from Eastern Europe, but looking at how soldier and French army was being discriminated against in France and said, we're going to create an Israeli state.
Yeah, I mean, basically that story was just like, there's nothing you can do to become one of them.
Exactly.
If they're gonna not accept us when we fight with their armies, whatever. And by the way, this is a lot of the colonized subjects of those empires also came to the same conclusion after World War I and World War II, because a lot of them fought for the empire in those wars. And then they were like, I'm still getting killed and discriminated against. And so these people will never understand us as equals. So that was kind of, yeah. I have no problem with Zionism when it says that. The problem comes in the solution. The solution was not then to go, the real solution would have been to say, and we're going to now align ourselves with the colonized of the world to fight against this racist colonial ideology. And we're going to fight it in Europe and stay on our lands because these are our lands, which they were. That would have been the proper decolonial answer. But they didn't say that. They just said, we'll join that project. That's as soon as Zionism said that, and it said that from the beginning, it became racist and settler colonial at its roots. Yeah, yeah. So question here, there, and then back there.
I just have a very quick question. A Semite, as I understand it, were a race that they were part of the Middle Eastern race. When you think of Semites, so they could be a Christian, you could be a Muslim, you could be a Jew. A Semite.
So, yes and no. The thing is, again, all of these constructions, it's not like they have an absolute universal essential answer. Again, Semitic was just like a language tree. It's a language tree.
Right now, when you talk about anti-Semitism,
Right.
it only applies to Jews.
But that's what it was always really, that term was used to describe anti-Jewish discrimination and hate. So again, it was always about that, right? I don't spend much time going, oh well, the origins of the Semitic people are here, and then they moved. Like this is nonsense. Nobody can actually prove any of these things. Nobody can prove that the European Jews are the descendants of people that were in Palestine at some point in history. Nobody can prove that because it can't be proven. Most likely, they were just converts to Judaism who happened to be European too. Yeah. So the whole racial theory of a Semitic race invading Europe and diluting the Aryan race is entirely baseless. There's no evidence for it, and it is just purely racist colonial thinking. That's it. That would not have developed in the way that it did within Europe if it wasn't for the development of that way of thinking in the colonies. That's where notions of racial purity really take hold, is in the colonies and the settler colonial projects of the empire, and then they come back into the heart of Europe and change the form of discrimination against European Jewish communities from one that was mostly religious to one that turns into a racial in the 18th century.
So you mentioned that Israel would never accept a two-state solution, but after being involved with the Palestinian solidarity movement here, I found that a lot of Palestinians are against two-state solution. Now I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. Do they mean driving out all the Jews and having a pure Palestinian state, or do they mean having a single state with all Palestinians and Jews having equal democratic rights? Because again, the Jews probably would never accept that because they'd be in a minority. So what is it that the Palestinians, when they say, we don't want a two-state solution, what do they mean? Do you think there is a path to that?
Right. So, first of all, most Palestinians that tell you they don't want a two-state solution because we know what that actually means, which is no Palestinian state. That this is part of the cover that is used by Israel and the Americans to continue settler colonization of Palestine and never give Palestinians a state. So the reason why most Palestinians are against the two-state solution is because we know it to be a fake solution. It's not a solution. It's the continuation of our subjugation and the plan to get rid of us altogether. Now, in terms of the alternative to that, you're going to have debates among the Palestinian community, as you would against anti-Zionist Israeli community, about what that structure would look like. The number of people who would say, oh, we want all the Jews to leave or want all the Israelis to leave is extremely small. The majority of Palestinians understand that that's not going to happen. That what is likely going to happen, if you get to that level, is that the ardent Zionists will leave on their own accord because they refuse to live in any context that doesn't give them Jewish supremacy. And for those people, I say, goodbye. Go somewhere else. If you don't want to live in this land as equals, then you can go. And so there will be no room for that ideology in this one state, or some people call the no state solution, whatever you want to call it. Now, within that, there's huge debates about what that's going to look like. And there isn't one universally acceptable answer right now. But it would be a matter of long debate. So you could construct the Constitution as binational, multinational. Do you make it a federal state, a confederal state? There's so many different models that have been debated by scholars that you can look at for that. Leila Farsakh and Leila Farsakh did the book by herself, Rethinking Palestinian Statehood, I think is the title of the book, back in 2021. It has a really good chapter going through those different forms of constitutions and forms of state, what they all look like. So it would depend. But the point right now is that we are talking about a path that only leads to one thing, and that is the expulsion of the Palestinian people and the subjugation of those who remain as a minority within their own lands, denying them statehood and sovereignty. So that's why most Palestinians talk down on the two-state solution, because we've seen where it has taken us. It's taken us to this moment. It's a lie. Nobody actually really supports it in Israel or in the US. Many countries in the global south have versions of the two-state solution that would seem acceptable for Palestinians. So for example, Bangladesh will say full sovereign state, all of 22% of Palestine would be exclusive Palestinian sovereignty. They would have a military, they would have their own policy, foreign policy, they'd have their own economy, their own currency, the settlements would be removed, the right of return would be addressed in some capacity or another. I think, most Palestinians in Palestine, if you give them that offer today, they would go, I'll take it. But that's nowhere near what is being offered. So that's why the alternative that a lot of people in the solidarity movement push for is something that is actually much more decolonial, which is the right of return for Palestinians to all their lands and the creation of a new entity that would be decolonized in its structure and its foundation from the beginning. Israelis will be more than welcome to stay in that state, so long as they renounce their claim of mastery and lordship over the people and the land. Yeah. So there was a question back there, and then.
Yeah, I was wondering what your thoughts are on the greed of the military-industrial complex in the Western Empire, and whether it's basically like in the long term doomed Western civilization to another dark age.
So the military-industrial complex is a big part of the story, absolutely, and it is the sort of one of the critical engines of the continuation of war and genocide and violence in general, because it generates enormous amounts of capital. I mean, people get enormously rich from it, and they don't want to give that up. And then they continue as well to push policies towards more violence and more warfare. So that is a critical part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and they raise generations of boys to love violence, and it's disgusting.
Absolutely. So it is a critical part of the story, and in the specific case of Israel, the military-industrial complex really views it as critical, because not only is there billions and billions of dollars being generated from all of this violence, but it's also then the use of those weaponries against the Palestinians is used as a marketing tool for those weapons to be sold on a global scale. So that then becomes an extra incentive. The interconnections between the US military-industrial complex and the Israeli military-industrial complex are significant, and they're really one and the same. They both make enormous money. All that money that goes into Israel is aid. It's not aid. It's an investment. Biden himself called it an investment. Many scholars who the sort of more realist political science types, who usually have terrible frameworks for understanding political issues, but are good at honestly analyzing it, also call it an investment. Because they see that money basically just goes to Israel, and then from the taxpayer to the government, American government, goes to Israel, and then straight from there comes right back to American firms. The Americans don't just give Israel billions and say, spend it as you wish. No, they go 100% of that, or anywhere between 85 to 100% of that has to come right back to American firms. And the other percentages, sometimes they'll give Israel that other percentage, not to go to China, but to use it on Israeli firms. So it goes from the taxpayer to the government to the Israeli, back to the weapons manufacturers who make a killing out of it. Then it goes and kills Palestinians, and then they both go to the world and see, look how good our weapons work, buy them. And then they both get sickly rich from that. So that's essentially the cycle that ensures profitability of killing. Yeah. Did you want to have quick follow-up, or?
It's a big question, so.
Okay, we can maybe come back to it at the end.
Yeah, I'd never heard about the one-state solution idea until the Gaza crisis. Jewish historians like Elon Musk, as well as one of the founders of the BDS movement.
Omar Barghouti.
Yeah, and he said there are different approaches, but a one-state solution to me seems like the only way, from a chessboard point of view. I think it's useful for all of us to think historically. South Africa was never stopped an apartheid state unless when you had all the European countries pushing South Africa to stop, it was only when America agreed that South Africa stopped. The Nazis in Germany, the war actually got the Nazis. But there was never a discussion about having a Nazi country and a non-Nazi Germany. But the apartheid South Africans would be very happy for an apartheid country and then a two-state solution. They would be happy for that if America told them to do it. But Israel, the only way Israel would do it, I think, would be maybe if China and the BRICS would eventually just convince America they're not going to war with you, we can trade, and then the advocacy BDS allowed to educate, somehow managed to educate the rest of the people like us, because even without mutual funds, pension funds, they're all linked in with military, Boeing, whatever. It's only schools, us, public, us educated Muslim, non-Muslim people actually begin to realize what's happening and then pressurize our governments. Unless you have fascist governments like the German, Romanian, Hungarian, Washington, whatever. Unless you have fascist governments that stop us, because of the liberation of us being educated, that could put pressure on our governments. Like what happened in, I really think the American citizens demonstrated on the streets to get the American government to pressurize Africa. That was just the American government. I didn't see the American politician push them.
Yeah, so look, whether you're pushing for a two-state solution or a one-state solution, even if you're pushing for the crappy two-state solution that some liberal Zionists push for, that is not a real state for Palestinians, you can't get any of them done without pressure on Israel. It's that simple. They're saying it very clearly. They only have one track in mind. Take it all. They're not facing pressure. Well, again, they're getting rewarded for it. They're just going like, why would I change track?
How do you engineer the Congress
So
to put pressure? You have to.
Clearly, there's, like I said, people power only works in one way, and that is to put pressure on governments to act differently than what they are currently doing. I see very little opening to pressure the American government to take a different path. I see very little opening, frankly, to make the Canadian government take a different path. So in this context, the only thing that makes sense to me is for the global South to put pressure directly on Israel. that will in effect put pressure on the Americans. But for that to happen, you need the political will in those countries to say, it's time to make a bold move to change the current world order. And I don't see them saying that. Even if I keep continuing to hear that they're saying that behind closed doors, I'm not seeing action that backs that up. So what is really needed, I think, at the moment is, wherever you are in the world, we're not in South Africa right now, we're not in China, we're not in those, we can't put pressure on those governments. You continue to put pressure on your own government. So that's all you can do. But I think ultimately, if you want to talk about it as a chessboard piece, you need states to put pressure on Israel. It's not going to be enough to do, we're not going to buy this product and that product. Continue to do that, don't get me wrong. Continue to do that, because that is part of the pressure. But ultimately, you're going to need state pressure. And that needs to come from some of those countries that I named in the Global South that could form a powerful bloc together. But there needs to be a change in the political will and the calculations of some of those countries that are being, I think, far too timid. Look, American imperialism is declining, but it's not declined. It's still extremely powerful. Many countries around the world still fear it, not just militarily, but economically. They fear the punishment that they would face from the U.S. But this can't go on forever. And I think this is an opening for some of those global South countries to rise up and make a bold move. I don't see too much of the downside. I really don't. What is he going to do? Okay, put more tariffs? You're already prepared for that now. You've already gone through it. You see what it looks like. He's going to go to war against those countries. If they all get together in China, Brazil, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco, Indonesia, he's not going to go against war against all those countries. He can't. U.S. empire can't do that. So the time is now for that sort of action, but I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it, unfortunately. But wherever you are in the world, I think just continue to put pressure on your own government and your own institutions as best as you can.
So a bit similar to my previous question, and again I raised the topic of advocating for the Canadian government to recognize Palestine. And the reaction I got from some Palestinian was that no, we don't want that because recognizing Palestine implies recognizing the current boundaries. And to me, the recognition is more of a philosophical thing, that we recognize the rights of Palestinians to have their own state, boundaries TBD. Like after the genocide started, I believe Spain, Ireland, and I don't know, Slovenia or Norway or somewhere, countries recognize Palestine. I believe right now even France and Macron said that he is
Considering it,
recognizing Palestine. So is there a problem with the recognition of Palestine by Western or any other states?
So, first of all, it's largely a symbolic move. So let's get that clear. It's not going to be the step that leads to Palestinian freedom. Right now, the majority of the world recognizes a Palestinian state. It's just the Europeans that don't, and Canada's part of that. So it's largely a symbolic move. It could have some negative consequences. For instance, it could be used in international discourse as a way to limit the discussion to the 22% of Palestine and eliminate the right of return. It could have those consequences. But the way I look at it is that that's already the consequence that we're in today. So I don't, sometimes when all you can get is a symbolic victory, then go get it. I don't think it's going to be the one that breaks the back of the movement or anything like that. It would have some positive consequences that would upset the Israelis. It would, for example, make it harder for them to legally, in the international arena, say the West Bank is mine now. Because people will say, but we recognize the state of Palestine that you're preventing, therefore now you're forever in violation of international law, and so on. Like, and so, these things are not going to lead to immediate effects, but they could have some positive effects as well. So I'm not opposed to pursuing that goal. I also don't think it's gonna, be the one that gets us to where we want. The Israeli state has no interest in declaring its own final boundaries and borders. So no matter what you do in terms of your recognition in these spaces, the question of boundaries will still be open because the Israelis want it open. So that's what I'd say. Wissam?
Yeah, thanks. My question kind of segues from the last two. Can you speak to what you think are the main ways in which Canada is complicit in the genocide and also like historically in the apartheid occupation? And what do you think are the main policy areas that civil society groups here should be pressuring the Canadian government on?
Right, so Canada has been complicit in a number of ways, like in terms of specific policies, but I think the overall picture tells you exactly how they've been complicit. One is that they participate in the denial of Palestinian rights and aspirations. They participate in the erasure of the Palestinian story, everything that I said today. You're not going to find it in K-12 education. You're not going to find it in universities unless you take a course with me, or Yahya, or someone else like that, right? You're not going to hear it on the mainstream media, right? Like none of this. You're not going to get accurate, honest discussions in policy debates, and so on and so forth, right? Like, so these are, I think, the more important ways in which Canada participates in the erasure of Palestine and in the erasure of our aspirations for freedom and liberation. And in terms of policies, so Canada participates in the training of the Palestinian Authority security forces, right? Which is designed to enable those forces to suppress Palestinian resistance against Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine, not to protect Palestinians or advance the Palestinian aspirations. They push for people-to-people programs and initiatives that are depoliticized entirely, right? Those are the only ones that Canada will wholeheartedly stand behind and support. They won't fund, for instance, groups and organizations that speak about liberation. If they go and help, let's say, a women's shelter in Palestine, the first thing that they'll tell them is, keep the occupation outside of your discourse. Right? Like, that's not just some accident. That's a policy. That's a government policy to basically tell the Palestinians, stop asking for your rights. We'll help you as individuals and all of that, but you're not going to get your rights as political rights that you aspire for. So in all of those ways, and the votes at the UN, things like that, right? Like, so it's continuing trade relations with Israel. It's continuing sales of weapons to Israel through, third parties like in the U.S. It still continues to buy weapons from Israel. So all of these are ways in which Canada is complicit in the genocide of the Palestinians. I think civil society organizations need to focus on a full two-way arms embargo. That's the ultimate goal is sever all economic ties with Israel. That should be the ultimate goal. That's the only way that you can give real substantial support to Palestine, is severing economic ties with Israel. Is that around the corner? Not even close. But arms embargo, that's a more gettable one now, as far as I see it. It's still a long way to go before you get that one. But I think continuing to insist on a two-way permanent arms embargo is something that a lot of civil society organizations should do in Canada right now. I think you'd get a lot of public support for it. Clearly you do, because the Liberals wouldn't have done their fake thing around that if it wasn't that they thought that, like, this one is not a bad one, we can do that. Of course, the Zionist organizations and the Israel state and the Israel lobby lost their minds over that, and Canada's doing this. It was never something that was going to really hurt Israel, what the Liberals did. But what the Israelis feared was that this is going to be the first step of a two-way full embargo, a real one, right? So they do fear that, and they should. For if I'm God forbid consulting them on their settler colonial project, I would be like, you should fear something like that, right? So that would be a huge victory. if we can get that. So I'd say put a lot of focus into that. And of course, continue with the insistence on the right of the Palestinian people and supporters of Palestine to continue to express that openly and to talk honestly and continue to put pressure on the mainstream media to start covering Palestine fairly. Yeah, those would be some of the things.
Just a quick dive into Palestinian politics and to briefly allude to what you said to Sam about the Palestinian Authority. I know they're not very popular. Do you ever see them coming out of the scene? Because the support for Hamas is huge, and even more so now the West Bank is growing. But you still have Mahmoud Abbas coming in and saying, you know, we should do away with Hamas, we should be together, and we'll take control of. How do Palestinian people feel? And I think, like I said, you briefly alluded to that Palestinian Authority is out. But can you ever see them getting out of Palestinian politics completely?
Well, clearly Abbas is a vampire, so.
In the background, sorry, just their background, or is it in partial tribute to Yasser Arafat and his Fatah movement saying that, you know, there's support for him?
There's no real grassroots support for Abbas or Fatah even right now. And let me throw this in there. There's declining support really for Hamas too. I would say so. It's just not set out in the open.
Okay, why would you?
And I would think if there's a new party that comes up today and sorry? Barghouti, I mean, he does have an alternative party. He doesn't have too much support. I think people view him as a little too nice and academic-y, and maybe, I don't know. I think he's a good man, and I support a lot of his political discourse. But I'm talking about a party that would speak to the aspirations of liberation, using, you know, Hamas's popularity is that. It's not, it's Islamist political ideology, it's not, it's, I mean, part of it is that there is conservatism on cultural issues in parts of Palestinian society for sure. But really, the heart of it is that they're like, that's the group that still speaks to our true aspirations for liberation. You know, so long as that party speaks to that from any kind of perspective or background, I think that would be the one. But I do think that there are some people that are, while support for Hamas has grown, it's because of a lack of an alternative, in my view. There are some people that are also sick of some of the things that Hamas does, particularly around, you know, what do you call it? Like, corruption is the word that captures it, but like, you know, an elite, a political elite forming within those circles, that, you know, that sort of thing. At any rate, the state of internal Palestinian politics right now is quite bad, very fragmented, very messy. Most of the people who support Fatah, they do it because they have no other option. That's their social livelihood. Otherwise, how are they going to make money? You find some of that with Hamas too, by the way. Like the support is based on that. A lot of the political factions in Palestine have always depended on that. You know, we'll give you a living with the money that we generate in order to, you know, gain popularity and so on. But yeah, it is extremely fragmented. Most people, you know, laugh at this whole new vice president or vice minister, whatever the hell he called him. I mean, people were just like, this is a joke. But they're also powerless to change that. I mean, what the PA did and is doing still in Jenin, their replication of the violences of the Israeli state against their own people. Trust me, there's a lot of, not just frustration, but there's like a lot of anger and yeah, real rejection of Abbas and the Palestinian Authority.
You don't see that portrayed in Western media. It's all
of course, everything focuses on the one demonstration against Hamas, and that's not even what I'm talking about when I refer. And that demonstration was a fake one. It was mostly about they wanted the war to end, and then there was a few that Abbas people in there that had the signs against Hamas. But I'm talking about something a little bit deeper that is behind the scenes that you hear in
within an imperial colonial global perspective. And I think part of that imperial and colonial mission is to create dependency on the imperial and colonial powers. So do you feel that when we talk about the Palestinian liberation movement and struggle as a nationalist issue, would feed into that dependency on the imperial and colonial framework, and as an alternative way to think about those issues, should we think about the liberation of Palestine and the Palestinian people is actually an anti-colonial and decolonial movement that has direct implication for the entire globe, based on the current redrawing of global interests on the map?
Yeah, so I mean, I clearly fall on the second one. Now, the question of the word nationalism and nationalist, how do you use that? So this has been a debate in decolonial movements throughout the 20th centuries, right? So, and when you read scholars like Frantz Fanon and Edward Said, they're always ambivalent about it, about the term nationalist. They saw it as necessary. People kind of forget that part. They always said it's necessary. But not, it should never come to mark the movement itself. And it should never become the aspiration or end goal is to just create a new nation state that is, allegedly independent and sovereign and so on. That to keep the goal of decolonial struggle in mind, which is the complete elimination of European empire in those regions, and basically expiating the self from all those forms of thinking and systems of powers and so on. Nothing short of creating a new version of what it is to be human, what is it to live in a society, what does a state mean, what does it to mean, what collectivity, what does that mean, what is economics? That was kind of the goal that these great thinkers and some of the revolutionary leaders in the 20th century sought after, right? Now, so it's good, this is my work and my theorization and all that, but then, I think the reason why Fanon and Said and others say it's necessary is because it's there. it's widespread. It's a way of thinking that captures the aspirations of a collectivity, to call it under the banner of a national struggle. And then, so the question then becomes, okay, well, what kind of nationalism is a specific political ideology advancing? And this is where you can bring in like the works of Mahmoud Mamdani, who differentiates between the conservative reactionary nationalism versus the revolutionary radical nationalism that were in competition during those anti-colonial struggles. And if you read Mamdani, he says the conservative, traditional one, reactionary one, won the day, and it ended up being supporting the colonial project because they ended up just forming elite, political and economic elites that serve the imperial interests. They get a good chunk of the crumbs and after people. So the question then becomes, what kind of, so I view it that way. I approach that question that way. What kind of nationalism is being advanced in a particular movement? So in the case of Palestine, many scholars like Nahl Abdo, Joseph Mas'ad to a certain extent too, they differentiate between the official nationalism that is exemplified in the Palestinian Authority versus the popular movement that has a different kind of nationalist sentiment altogether. This is the type of thing that Hamid Dabashi comes to the defense of in his book. It's to say that that word and that use of nationalism is actually not just necessary, it's healthy, it's good, because it's actually the thing that the state nationalism can never actually control and defeat once and for all. The people's sense of nationalism, which is basically, to summarize, like the people's sense of a shared collective story and experience. Right? So, I see it as continuing to play a role, whether you like it or not. So the question is to for academics and analysts and activists and people engaged is to continue to push for that more revolutionary, radical form of nationalism that properly situates any particular national struggle within this larger project of creating an alternative decolonized order. And that therefore necessarily includes people from across the world. So that's kind of where I stand on this. But you're not going to be able to just, magic wand and the word disappears from public discourse. Not going to happen. So direct the people to words. And that was basically what Fanon said. Yeah. Direct people towards the right path. Yeah. Last question?
Okay.
Unless there's one more that people
Yeah.
are burning
Well,
to get out, but yeah.
Yeah, you touched on it briefly, like you're talking about a new human experience or something along those lines, and I was thinking, like, what are good ways to fight bigotry and hatred and racism in one's community?
Well, call it out when you see it. Don't be shy about that. Stop thinking, oh, this is going to make the situation awkward. It's okay to make things awkward with a racist. It's fine. Let them feel awkward. I don't care. And if they're out of your lives because of that, all right. Moving on. What do you've lost a racist friend, so what? So call it out wherever you see it. That's, and oppose it and say, no, this is not okay, this is not normal. And don't be, don't be afraid. Drop that whole fear of speaking up for Palestine. You've got to break through that fear barrier. And do it in your own way. I'm not saying everybody should do what I do or what Wissam does and so on. But do it in your own ways, in your own comfort level, but don't not do it at all. So, but always push back and don't be afraid, because you have the truth and justice on your side. They have all the weapons and all the resources and all of that. We just have truth and justice. So don't be shy to use them. Yeah, last question.
I just have a comment. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. I mean, I could listen to you all day. I'm just, not to be pessimistic, but do we even see any kind of peace during our lifetime? I mean, the United States, with the amount of power, and just look at with what Trump's trying to do, tariffs is carrying the entire world. So with the, Jewish lobby being so strong in the United States, they control Congress, they control the media. The United States has veto power over everything. I just don't, personally, I'm not sure, what's going to happen. I mean, whether there's a lot of discussion here, a lot of people are, siding with the Palestinian movement, but unfortunately, the superpowers, seem to.
Yeah, so by the way, just a quick correction. I don't use the term Jewish lobby because that's not accurate. It's the Israel lobby. It's the Israel lobby. And that's, it's not fair for many Jewish Americans that oppose the Israeli state and so on, right? But yeah, so the Israel lobby is quite strong. No, look, we're facing a huge empire with enormous power. We know that. But look at it that way when you have those moments. Look at how much resources, look at the magnitude of resources and energy the US empire has put into the elimination of a stateless people, and they still haven't done it. And then look at how much they're scared of a stateless people. We got nothing. Be prepared to do it for a lifetime, so what? Then pass it on to the next generation. That's what Palestinians do. That's what indigenous people here do. Some struggles, you gotta understand, they're long. And to outlast those superpowers who are in it for just one thing, that is generation of power, they stand for nothing. They only stand for power and wealth. Be proud of what you stood for in your life, and what it is that you'd like the younger generation to take from you, and hand it off, and good luck and keep it going. And that's all you can do. That's all you can do at the end of the day. And continue to make the case and continue to speak up and eventually these things change on those levels. You know, no superpower has ever stayed a superpower forever. They've all gone. So will this one. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.